Welcome to our deep dive into the life of President Jimmy Carter. We got a ton of listener questions, so clearly you all want to really get to know this guy.
Yeah, fascinating figure.
Definitely. We're going to cover a lot of ground, how he even got to the presidency, what he's best known for, and of course some of the pushback he got,
Right.
both during his time in office and afterward.
And right off the bat, what's striking is how unusual his path was.
You're telling me.
I mean, from peanut farmer to, get this, a nuclear engineer in the U.S. Navy, and then somehow into Georgia politics, and boom, the White House. Not exactly the usual resume.
Yeah, not many job postings out there asking for peanut farming experience.
Right.
But it does feel like those early years, they really shaped him.
Oh, absolutely. Growing up in rural Georgia, it gave him this deep connection to everyday people, a practicality you don't always see in those career politicians. And then that Navy experience, talk about a change of pace, exposed him to cutting-edge technology, thinking strategically on a global scale, really broadened his horizons.
So not just a fun fact on his bio, it actually laid the groundwork for how he led.
For sure.
Okay, so presidency time. From what I'm seeing here, it's a real mixed bag of highs and lows.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, on one hand, you've got the Camp David Accords. Monumental. No other president had cracked that nut, bringing Egypt and Israel together. Total game changer in the Middle East.
Huge accomplishment. But his term is also remembered for some really tough times, like the Iran hostage crisis. That just hangs over everything.
It does, yeah. Such a complicated and painful situation, dragging on for over a year, created this national sense of frustration, definitely affected how people saw Carter's leadership.
What gets me, though, is even while all that was happening, he was still pushing ahead with other stuff. Like, people forget, he's the one who created the Departments of Energy and Education.
Good point.
It's not just moving chairs around in the government. These were big moves, responding to real needs, and they still shape the U.S. today.
Absolutely. He saw that a secure energy future, a strong education system, those were vital for America long term. Legacies that get overshadowed for sure by all those economic woes and that hostage situation.
Yeah, speaking of, seems like the economy is one of the biggest criticisms leveled at his presidency. Inflation, unemployment, that couldn't have been easy to deal with.
It was a rough time for sure. Those domestic issues really cast a shadow, even on something as big as the Panama Canal treaties.
Oh, right. Giving control of the canal back to Panama, that was bold.
Yeah.
Strengthened ties with Latin America, but man, did it cause a stir back home. Seems he wasn't afraid to make the tough calls, popular or not.
He did things his way, that's for sure. That willingness to stick to his guns even when people pushed back says a lot about him. And it's something you see throughout his life, especially in what he did after leaving office. But before we get ahead of ourselves, It's worth remembering that even with all the turbulence, his presidency wasn't just about the hostage crisis or a bad economy.
Good point.
There were other things going on.
It reminds us that good leadership isn't about avoiding tough stuff. It's about how you handle it. How you keep working towards what you believe in, even when things are rough.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And for Carter, his vision went way beyond the White House walls.
Perfect segue. Because in part 2, we're diving into exactly that, those post-presidency years. We'll see how all that he went through, good and bad, shaped how he approached helping others on a global scale.
Oh yeah, get ready for a story of some serious commitment, compassion, this relentless drive for peace and justice. I think you'll be pretty inspired.
All right, so we're back and ready to dig into what you might call the most inspiring chapter of Carter's story, what he did after the White House.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he didn't go the usual route. No quick memoirs, no fancy board positions. He went a totally different way.
He did. The Carter Center, this nonprofit all about really tackling global issues.
Head on.
Yeah. Human rights, fair elections, getting rid of diseases.
Yes.
Super ambitious. It wasn't just talk, though. He was out there in the thick of it. Conflict zones, working side by side with healthcare workers to fight things like guinea worm disease.
He rolled up his sleeves, that's for sure. Not content to just sit back and, issue statements. He wanted to be part of making things happen.
Yeah, and Habitat for Humanity.
Oh, classic.
A former president in his 80s, even 90s, building houses with volunteers. Can you picture many other world leaders doing that?
Really?
That image of him, hammer and nails, sweat on his brow, that's dedication.
It was about really making a difference, not a photo op.
Exactly.
And think about all those causes he took on. Election monitoring, for example, making sure votes were fair in places transitioning to democracy. That meant navigating some dicey situations, corrupt officials, even threats to his own safety.
And he spoke his mind on human rights, no matter where the abuses were. Didn't hesitate to call out governments, even those considered U.S. allies. Took guts, especially for a former president.
Oh, yeah. It all came back to this core belief he had in every person's dignity. He'd speak truth to power no matter the consequences.
And all that work, peacemaking, standing up for human rights, it led to the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002.
Well deserved. And it wasn't just for Camp David, though that was huge. It was for everything he kept doing in the decades after. Untiring efforts to find peaceful solutions, is how they put it. Promoting democracy, human rights, and just overall progress.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But what strikes me is how it all connects back to his earlier life. Remember we talked about how he grew up with that practicality, that sense of everyday folks, and then the Navy showed him those big, messy, global problems.
You're seeing the pattern here, and yeah, those early experiences, they totally shaped how he saw the world and how he led. He wasn't one to back down from a challenge, whether it was Middle East peace, fighting disease, or building homes for those in need.
He gets this feeling he was driven by a real sense of purpose, wanting to use what he had, his experience, his platform, to truly make a difference. Not for personal gain, not for some legacy thing, but to serve.
Exactly. He often talked about his faith being a guiding force, that idea of love and compassion being strong enough to overcome even the biggest obstacles. And it wasn't just words for him. It was about action, that unwavering commitment to helping those less fortunate, those facing injustice.
So we've got this interesting contrast. A president who, despite some big wins, left office with this feeling of, I don't know, almost like he hadn't quite succeeded. But then this incredible second act where he becomes even more impactful globally.
It shows us leadership isn't just one thing. It's not always about holding office or having political power. It can be about dedicating yourself to a cause, using your skills to actually improve people's lives. And in that way, Carter's time after the presidency is like this powerful statement about the impact of service, compassion, and never giving up on making the world more just and peaceful.
Great point. Now, as we head into the final part of our deep dive, it's worth asking, how have these years shaped his legacy overall? The guy who left the White House kind of under a cloud becomes this global symbol of peace and humanitarianism.
Yeah, that's a transformation worth unpacking a bit more. How do we balance the perceived shortcomings of his time as president with this undeniably huge impact he had after?
It's a tricky question, and it really gets to the heart of how we judge leadership, how we decide what's success and what's failure. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the life and legacy of President Jimmy Carter. It's been quite a journey, from that peanut farm all the way to the Oval Office, and then, wow, onto the world stage as this tireless champion for peace and human rights.
And as we wrap up, I think that question we posed last time is still right there. How do we reconcile those complex years as president with the undeniably huge impact he had after? It's almost like we're looking at two different Jimmy Carters.
Yeah, isn't it? We see the president dealing with a rough economy, that hostage crisis that just wouldn't end, and a feeling that maybe his vision, his goals, they didn't quite happen the way he wanted. But then he comes out of it, not bitter or anything, but more determined, I'd say, to really make a difference.
It is amazing, that resilience. He could have easily just, retreated, become a recluse. But no, he channeled all of that, those frustrations even, into something positive, something bigger than politics or awards or any of that.
And it's in those years after the presidency that his leadership, it kind of takes on this whole new meaning. That willingness to take risks, to have the tough conversations, to stand up for what he believed in, even when it was unpopular.
Yeah, those qualities were always there, but they found this new way to express themselves in his humanitarian work. He wasn't afraid to jump into conflict zones, challenge governments that were doing wrong, confront those uncomfortable truths that people would rather ignore.
The Carter Center became this incredible platform, really. Giving a voice to those who weren't being heard, shining a light on injustice everywhere, pushing for dialogue and understanding where others just saw division.
Exactly. And sure, he got criticized for things he did as president, for speaking his mind so boldly afterward, but he never wavered. His values, his faith, that belief he had in the good of humanity, it never went away.
And I think that's the key to understanding him. It wasn't about ego. It wasn't about building some grand legacy. It was about this genuine desire to serve, to ease suffering, to make the world, even in a small way, better than how he found it.
And that's a legacy that's tough to measure, you know? Sure, you can point to Camp David, the Panama Canal, wiping out guinea worm disease, all those elections he helped monitor, the houses built, the voices he amplified. But it goes beyond the list of accomplishments.
It's about the example he set, right? The inspiration, that reminder that one person, even someone who'd been president and had his struggles, could still have this huge impact.
And that impact spreads out, you know? It inspires other people to get involved, to speak up, to be more compassionate. That's a legacy that'll keep unfolding long after he's gone.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I have to say, I'm just in awe of how much President Carter did in his life and the sheer depth of his dedication to helping others. It really makes us think about what success really means, what real leadership is, and what it truly means to leave behind a legacy that matters.
Yeah, it's a story that reminds us that real satisfaction, real fulfillment, it doesn't come from chasing power or money. It comes from giving yourself to something bigger, to doing something that makes a positive difference in the world.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, a huge thank you to all of you for joining us on this journey of exploration and discovery. We hope this deep dive into the life of President Jimmy Carter has given you some new perspectives and maybe even inspired you to learn more about this incredible man and the causes he fought for.
Yeah, keep learning, keep asking those tough questions, and keep trying to make the world a little better, even in small ways, one act of kindness at a time. I think that's the best way to honor President Carter's legacy.